Welcome to the Life After Sugar podcast, the podcast that's not just about sugar, but about your relationship with it and also with food and especially with yourself. So if you want to discover your life after sugar and hear inspiring stories from all kinds of people who also cut out sugar in their way, at their pace, for their own reasons, this is the podcast for you. Because when you take away the sugar, you can finally discover the real sweetness in your life. I'm your host, Netta Gorman. Now, if you have diabetes, then you probably know what a CGM is because you might use one. A CGM is a continuous glucose monitor, and it's a little gizmo that you put in your arm that measures your blood glucose. And why am I telling you this? Well, it's because this week's guest is talking all about why it's so fascinating to get the data from a CGM, even if you're not diabetic. So we'll get to my chat with my guest, Catherine, in just a moment. But first, I just wanted to tell you that if you're looking for some free resources about how to get rid of cravings, then I have plenty for you. Come check out the Life After Sugar Facebook page and subscribe to the Life After Sugar YouTube channel, as well as my Instagram account at My Life After Sugar, which is where you'll get all kinds of inspiration so that you can see that it's perfectly possible to live a happy and active life, even if you don't eat sugar. You can also check out my TikTok account at Netta_Life After Sugar. And you can also download my 5 tips to start getting rid of cravings. Look in the description in the show notes along with this episode. All right, so today I'm with Catherine Staffieri from NutriSense. Catherine is a registered dietitian, and we're going to be talking about how to measure blood glucose levels and why. But Catherine, I'd just like to know a little bit about your background first.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today to talk about this. I am a registered dietitian, as you said. I've been a registered dietitian since about 2014, but this is actually a second career for me. I used to work in finance, and then I realized my true passion was really about food and science and health and longevity. And I have been working, various different jobs since getting my master's degree. And then I happened upon NutriSense, which has just been incredible. And I've been with NutriSense for the past 2.5 years now.
Okay. All right, cool. So what service do you provide without this being a sort of a marketing pitch? What service do you provide?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people are really, maybe they've heard the term CGM or glucose monitoring, and what does that mean? And why, how does that apply to me? So just a basic overview of what NutriSense is. So we are a tech startup, a healthcare wellness tech startup. And what we do is we provide an app. We have created this really amazing app, NutriSense app. And what it does is it helps use a continuous glucose monitor. And that is a little disc. I'm actually wearing one right now. I know you don't have visual, but I'm wearing one right now. It's about the size of a quarter. And it is inserted and kind of lives on the back of your arm for 14 days. We use a device made by Abbott Labs. So we don't make our own devices. We use the Abbott Freestyle Libre. And what happens is when you sign up for our program, you get sent 2 sensors in the mail, and you download our app and you start scanning. And you take your phone, you open up our app, and you start scanning the sensor. And the sensor is collecting your internal glucose that is flowing through your body. It is continuously collecting that data. So the sensor collects the data, it holds onto it, and when you scan it to your phone, it downloads that data into our app. And so you get what I like to think of as sort of like a little window into what's happening into your body in real time, which is pretty cool.
It's cool.
Yeah.
How can that be that and scanning your arm, like you have yours punched into your upper arm, right? How can your phone read what's going on inside of your body without having any sort of blood sample?
Right. So we're not, so some people might be familiar with like an at-home glucometer. Maybe you've seen someone do a little finger prick. They'll draw a little bit of blood and then they'll insert it into their meter, and they'll get their blood glucose measurement, right? So that's the amount of glucose in your blood at that moment in time. What these continuous glucose monitors are doing is that it's a little disc, if you look it up, and there's a tiny little filament in the middle of it. And when you sort of attach that into your arm, that little filament is inside. That's the sensor, and it's actually measuring the glucose in your interstitial fluid. So you're not like puncturing anything, and you're not actually reading your blood glucose. You're reading the glucose in your interstitial fluid. But basically, it's the same thing, and it's doing it on a continuous basis. So the little sensor is able to collect data for up to 8 hours, which is really interesting. So you just have to scan your phone to that sensor about 3 times a day, approximately.
Okay, all right. So it's not like you're always getting the data. It's you get the data when you scan that gizmo.
Correct. That's correct. There are some newer, if your audience is really keyed into some of this, there are some newer models, Dexcom and the Freestyle Libre 3, and there's a Bluetooth element to it. So you don't scan, it's just transmitting the data directly to your phone. So it's eliminating the scan part.
Crikey. What will they think of next? So, I mean, someone like me who's not diabetic, I mean, I can see the advantage of doing this for diabetics, but if you're not diabetic, why would you even need one of these things?
Yeah, I think we get that question all the time. And I think it's such a great question because you don't need to be a diabetic to wear one of these. You don't need to have even, a pre-diabetic or anything like that. We get people using our app that come to us in all stages of life from, 20s to 80s, with all different kinds of health goals. So what I really like to say is, and I sort of mentioned that previously, is that I like to think of this as like a little window into your body. So no matter what, I'm always like, don't you want to know what's going inside your body, like going on inside your body? Isn't that super cool? So personally, I just think it's really interesting, kind of a knowledge is power, really interesting to see what's happening. Maybe I think everything's fine and my lab work looked good, but when I tell people, if you go to your doctor, your primary care doctor once a year, and they do a lab draw, I mean, that's one data point. That's like one moment in time. Like maybe your Tuesday was really great and you'd gotten a lot of sleep the night before, but maybe for months and months before that, you've been really stressed out. You haven't been eating well. You've been going through some hormonal fluctuations. There's all these kinds of really nuanced things that a moment in time, a single finger stick or lab draw does not capture that. So we really like to emphasize that you're getting an ongoing, continuous look at how your body is doing, and you can optimize, you can feel better by knowing what's going on in your body. So in the short term, everyone starts to see these patterns and they're like, oh my gosh, like, oh, I should make a difference in my breakfast, or wow, my workouts have gotten so much better, or I changed up my dinner and now I'm sleeping so much better. So we get all these really cool short-term benefits when we're monitoring our glucose. And then we also get so many people that, do this over time for months and years, and their lab markers go down, and they're showing this data to their physicians, and things are really improving in terms of their risk for lowering their risk for chronic disease in the long term. So there's sort of the short term you feel better, and the longer term you live longer.
Yeah, that's
Benefits
a pretty
to it.
big
Yeah,
benefit. Yeah, and not just live longer, but live healthier.
correct.
Yeah,
That's what we're aiming. That's what we're aiming for.
absolutely, absolutely. So, this monitor or CGM, right? Right? Is that
Yep.
CGM? Yeah. It measures blood glucose. Now, just for everyone listening, how much blood does a regular normal person have in their body, give or take?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how much blood we have in our body.
Several liters, let's say.
Yeah.
How much blood glucose is there at any one time, more or less, give or take, do you know, in a person's whole body?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So we get people, I think a lot of times people use the metric of the A1C. Are you familiar with, your hemoglobin A1C? And that's
I'm
kind of,
familiar, but I'm just wondering if you could explain it anyway.
oh, sorry, in terms of how much glucose is flowing around. Well, it's really dependent on the balance between glucose and insulin in your body and how much glucose you're taking in, right? So the glucose floating around in your body is a factor of the amount of carbohydrate that you've taken into your body, but also the amount that you have stored in your body that your body has pulled out of storage to use for energy. So at any given time, it's going to fluctuate, on any person, and it'll fluctuate throughout your day, right?
Mhm.
On average, we like to see glucose in milligrams per deciliter, on average below 105. That's our threshold. And we have other thresholds for like a fasting glucose, glucose variability. We have lots of metrics in terms of what we like to see as a good range of glucose control. But on average, we want to see it lower than 105 milligrams per deciliter.
Okay, that's the American measurement. I think it's 5 mmol per liter in Canada.
Correct.
I
Yes.
think because we used a different calculation. And I just looked it up. Well, there's about 5 liters in volume of blood per sort of adult person, give or take, how much we weigh. And so how much glucose is normally circulating in the human blood, I read, is 3.3 to 7 grams, which, as far as I know, is about the equivalent of 1 teaspoon.
Interesting. Okay.
Very
Yeah.
little. We actually need very little blood glucose. We need it, but very little. We'd think that, that we need glucose for energy, but we do, but actually not that much.
Well, because the body can also rely on its other energy source of ketones, right? Although that kind of requires some effort in terms of restricting carbohydrates for a little bit to make the body kind of shift over to that other energy source.
Yeah, or
Yeah,
fasting. Yeah.
correct.
Okay. So very interesting to know that we measure blood glucose either with the monitor that you're speaking about, or at the hospital I get my blood drawn, for example, when I have regular blood tests. Fasting insulin, why it's not fasting insulin, it's fasting blood glucose that I get checked. Why
Correct.
fasted? Why do I need to be fasted?
Yeah, so we want to see the body kind of without the noise of a meal. Well, the traditionally they want to see the body sort of without the noise of a meal, or caffeine, or exercise or anything like that. All of that can impact your glucose levels. So they want to see it in kind of the body in a rested state. And what's really interesting, generally they want to see it at a higher level. We have a bit more of a stricter level in terms of what we want to see, our fasted glucose. But what's really interesting is when you're seeing a higher level, that's showing us that there's some dysregulation, right? Is that the body, you mentioned insulin, and what we want to explain is that glucose is what we take into our body, right, in the form of a carbohydrate, but the body produces a hormone called insulin. And so we want those to really be in balance. And when they are out of balance, that's when you are metabolically dysregulated. That's when you can tell that there's something going on. The body isn't producing enough insulin, the body isn't recognizing insulin, and you develop insulin resistance, which is a term that more and more people are hearing about.
Yes, yes. And this podcast is all about reducing or cutting sugar, or at least refined carbohydrates, right? I've got nothing against fruits and veggies and, dairy, especially fermented dairy, for myself especially. And so would you say that cutting refined carbohydrates is something that pretty much across the board, or all nutrition experts agree on?
Absolutely, 100%. We like to say there's always room for a birthday, or we can always try and find ways to enjoy something special here and there. But in general, you can see what it does to your body. Again, it's this window that you can see what happens when you have a Coke or cake or cookies or some of these really even white bread, white rice versus a whole grain. The body really has to do a lot of effort to manage the refined carbohydrates when you take those in.
Yeah. I mean, what I teach as well is that, and I'm not a registered dietitian in any way, shape, or form, but what I teach is that those refined carbohydrates, it's not just the amount of this or the height of the spike, the blood sugar or blood glucose spike that they cause, it's the speed at which the blood glucose levels go up. And then, of course, the pancreas has to produce insulin to bring it right down again. But it's that speed and it's the frequency. It's how often we eat those types of foods. And you were just mentioning, well, we need treats and whatnot in our diet, which I 100% agree with. Do those treats necessarily have to include refined carbs, though?
Not at all. Not at all. I think we like to come at it of an inclusivity. Some people think that we are about a keto diet or no carbohydrates ever, and we really like to meet people where they are. A lot of training as a dietitian is understanding where your health goal is and where you are right now and helping you get there, right? And so sort of telling someone never again doesn't really get you very far. So absolutely, there are so many other ways that you can enjoy a special occasion that doesn't necessarily mean a refined carbohydrate.
All right, cool. I just want to take a quick break to say that if this is your first time here, then welcome and thank you for listening to this podcast. And whether you're new or a regular and you haven't yet rated or reviewed this podcast, could I ask you to scroll down and tap on the stars to rate this podcast and also to write a short review to let me know how this podcast is helping you in your life after sugar. I love reading your reviews. And when you rate and review this podcast, not only does it encourage me to continue making new episodes, but it also helps to share this podcast and have more people see it so that we can help more people feel better and lose weight with less sugar. So again, thank you for rating and reviewing this podcast and for spreading the word about sugar. So I'm interested to know how people use this monitor. Diabetics, type 2, do type 1 diabetics have this type of monitor?
They can. Our program does not accept anyone that is using this with insulin, any type 1 diabetics or even a type 2 that's using this to dose their insulin off of. But yes, the hardware, Abbott Lab hardware is used for type 1 diabetics.
Oh, okay. All right. And I'm quite active in the intermittent fasting community. And, a lot of people, especially in the States, that I've come across, use this type of monitor to monitor their blood glucose when they're fasting. Can you explain why they would do that?
Yeah, well, I think intermittent fasting is so interesting, and it can be a really useful tool for men and women, that are trying to get their glucose under control, right? And sometimes they're going on a longer fast. Some people sometimes do extended fasts, and it's really helpful to be able to see how your glucose is doing in terms of, when you're not taking in any food whatsoever, whether it's, protein, fats, or carbohydrates. And so people want to kind of see what is interesting is you can kind of, when someone's doing an extended fast, they might have some, little blips in their glucose, and they're like, why is this happening? Why is my glucose going up? And that's when we start to talk about some of those other pillars of health, right? Stress, sleep, your hormones, some of those things that aren't necessarily food related, but that can impact your cortisol, or can impact, your body is under stress, and therefore it needs to pull some glucose that's out in storage in your body, and therefore can show some of the fluctuations. So really interesting for people to see that when they are fasted, to see that sometimes there are some fluctuations in their glucose.
Yeah, totally. And I'm sugar free, refined sugars, refined flour, and sweetener free for the last 8 years. And it's so funny because during a stressful time in my life recently, my I don't measure my blood glucose, but I can see it in how tight my pants are. That's how it manifests itself. And my pants got tighter, euphemism,
Oh,
because I was stressed, and I was not eating any more refined carbs than I usually do. My diet didn't change, my fasting didn't really change, but I put on a few pounds. And I wonder if that's to do with stress and not sleeping so well, and hormones. I'm 53, maybe I'm in menopause, is that does that have as much of an influence on my blood sugar levels as food?
absolutely. Yes, because of the hormones, right? So the body is in such an intricate balance. And even if we control our food and we eat the same thing, every single day, our sleep might be different. And when our sleep is off, our ability to be sensitive to insulin is different, right? The body's hormones are different. When we are stressed out, the body naturally produces cortisol, and that naturally increases your glucose, because in the body's mind, it's like, oh, wait, we're under stress. Like, an animal's chasing us, it's that prehistoric brain. Let's release some glucose because we might need it, right? And so these are things that we can't control. Our cortisol level, like that's just the natural function of the body. And so these are things that absolutely can impact your glucose, that really aren't nutritionally related.
Yeah, that's amazing. You wouldn't think as a layperson that anything other than food would have an influence on your blood glucose levels.
Yeah. And that's why I think we get a lot of people that, again, to answer your first question, that say, I don't have diabetes. I don't need this. And I say, I promise you, everyone can learn from this monitor, even if all the dietitians and nutritionists at the company have worn this, and we all say, oh my gosh, I had no idea, and we're all very well educated on the subject. But we also like to emphasize that this is really an N=1 experiment. Your glucose is going to look very different than mine, even if we were to eat the exact same thing, because we all have different stress levels, we have different lifestyles, we have different exercise patterns and sleep patterns and things like that. So I always say, you can watch someone on Instagram make a smoothie or something, and they feel fantastic. You might make that same smoothie and say, oh, I'm exhausted, I don't have any
Yeah.
energy, I'm hungry an hour later, right? Because your body is so different than theirs. So wearing this monitor and looking at the data and having the nutritionist help you along for the first month, it gives you that guidance, like, oh, I had no idea. Like, we get so
Mhm.
many aha moments along the way.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating. In fact, I've done that experiment myself.
Yeah.
And I'm not supposed to say it publicly, but I wore one of these things because here, as far as I know, you can't have one of these monitors unless you've got a doctor's note or a prescription that says that you need it. Is that the case?
Correct.
Yeah, is that the case?
Yes, they are. Yeah, they still are under yes, have to be done through a prescription.
Yeah. So by whatever means, I got one, and I wore it for 2 weeks. It was a couple of years ago, although, as I say, my diet hasn't really changed since then. And uh, I'd like to know a bit about the values, the numbers, right? So I can tell you that as far as I know, we were talking about five mmol per liter in Canada, and that is, you were saying, about 105, 90 to 100, around there in in
Yeah,
American calories?
we like to see the daily average glucose less than 105 in
Yeah.
terms of yes, United States measurements. And we like to see a fasting even lower. We like to see a fasting between the range of 70 to 90, which is much lower really than you would see at a doctor's office. So um a lot of people say like, no, I look fine at my annual. And then they wear this and they're like, oh, wait a minute. This is
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, I regularly got around sort of 3.5 in
Mhm.
Canadian terms, which I think is, what is it, like 70 or something? And I'm not very good at math, but it's way
Yeah.
lower than what you just mentioned.
Right. Right.
And from what I could tell, I should have been in some sort of coma or at the hospital with those numbers, but I was running around with lots of energy and feeling just fine. So I'm just wondering where these values come from to be able to say we want to see between this number and that number.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. We have a ton of research behind all of our, what we consider to be our safe ranges. And I will say that a lot of times when you're wearing this monitor, and you're measuring the interstitial fluid, you're not measuring blood glucose, right? You're measuring glucose in the interstitial fluid. So there's a little bit of a lag time between what a blood glucose monitor is showing versus when that glucose diffuses across the border into the interstitial fluid. So, and none of these devices are perfect. And so we always tell people if you have a lab draw, which is the gold standard, or even just a finger stick, even though there's a margin of error built into that, you can calibrate the sensor. So sometimes people will see this and they're like, this seems way off. And they might calibrate it to a recent finger stick or lab draw. And that might alter you up, down, or 10 basis points. And really it depends on some people are really kind of in that ketosis phase, depending on where you are and how much carbohydrate you're taking in. You absolutely might run in the 60s, or I've had people that kind of run in the 50s and 60s. You're fine, everyone's fine, like as long as you're feeling fine. Your body's just using a different kind of fuel, which is totally legitimate. What we like to emphasize with so many of our people is that let's not get hung up on that baseline number too much. What we want to look at is the trends over time. We want to look at the variability, like you said. We want to look at the amount of spikes that you're having during the day, the sort of how quickly you're coming up and how quickly you're crashing down. That's really the interesting data to us. And the glycemic variability, that's a really much better predictor of metabolic health and insulin resistance over time.
Very interesting. Fascinating. Yeah. And so if I were the cynical type of person, which I'm not, that's a good introduction to this question. I've read that when they, and I can't say exactly who they are, but when they change the values and the range, that can include or exclude millions of people as being pre-diabetic or diabetic just by shifting the numbers in the range, right? And again, if I were cynical, I'd say, well, if they shifted it slightly and there were suddenly more pre-diabetics or diabetics, then, they'd be able to sell more drugs for them. But that's why I'm so curious to know about where these ranges come from and how they determine like the cutoff range to say, well, from this number or, this range, you're now pre-diabetic or diabetic. So does the monitor that you sell, does it sort of give you a little message to say, hey, you're like in the danger zone?
So we have a range. The standard range when you download our app is 70 to 140, which I think perhaps could translate to 5 to 8, but I'd have to go back and double check that. But that's our sort of standard range. But some people just adjust it on their own to be a very tight range. It's really it's applicable and malleable to your own health goals. So some people really don't want to go over 120. Some people don't want to go over 110. Again, some people run down in the 60s or whatever. And so, our graph will show a line, a continuous line, and you might dip down into the red, and that makes people uncomfortable. But again, you can calibrate this. So a lot of it is we try not to get too caught up in those hard numbers, and we try and look at the trend. Whether you're bouncing between 110 and 120, or are you bouncing between 70 and 140? Like, are you having much bigger swings? That's really what we care about.
And so you wear this in your arm, well, or wherever, right? It doesn't have to be in your upper arm.
No, it does. The Freestyle Libre, the 14-day has to go in the upper arm. Yeah.
Okay. So you wear this for 14 days, and then what?
That's just the life of the sensor, and then the sensor expires. You can sort of pop it off, and then you can put the next one on. And our plans, our NutriSense offers subscription plans on a monthly basis, so it's about 2 sensors a month.
Okay. And does it hurt to put it in your arm?
No, not at all. I think that's one of the biggest fears and hurdles that people have to go over to put this on. And we have tons of videos on our Instagram page of people putting it on and going, oh, that didn't hurt. Oh, that didn't hurt. I was on a podcast with someone a month or so ago, and she put it on like with the video on so everyone could see her, her reaction. She said, that didn't hurt at all. So it looks like it might hurt, but I promise you it really does. I've worn so many of them.
Okay. So you wear one yourself as just, as a point of interest and from your own personal, just curiosity to see what your body's doing and how it reacts to different foods and different, as we were saying, other influences like stress and sleep and whatnot. And so you can wear it for longer than 14 days. You can wear it for as long as you want, right? If you pay for it.
You can keep, yep, exactly. Yep. As soon as one ends, you can pop another one on. Yep.
Okay. So let's say someone is wearing this in their upper arm, they're scanning it, they've got the data, they've done it for, I don't know, let's say 3 months, right? And you say the first month they get a dietitian included in the price, right? Then what? Like, what do you do with this data?
Yeah, I think that's one of our really key messages is that, you can track your calories, you can track your sleep, you can track your steps, you can track and track, but what do you do with it, right? I mean, you could finger stick yourself every day for 3 months, but like, what do you do with that, right? So we're here to help you optimize. So your nutritionist will be looking at your data saying, hey, it looks like your lunch is really, you're having these huge spikes every day at lunch, and you're saying that you're really tired and you're crashing in the afternoon. Let's work on that. And so we offer you actionable behavior change ideas to help improve the way you're feeling and improve your glucose, right? And so we'll say, okay, why don't you try adding in a little bit more protein to your lunch? Let's try taking a walk for 15 minutes after lunch. Okay, it looks like around 3 o'clock you're dipping low. Let's get you a really good high protein snack around that time. Have you drank water? Or, sometimes it's about, just like maybe you had a really great workout in the morning, but you haven't moved in 6 hours since then. So we got to get you moving again. So we have our expertise is looking at your data and helping you make behavior changes so that you feel better at the end of those 3 months. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've totally changed what time I have dinner. I used to eat at 8:30 at night standing up, and now I eat 2 hours earlier sitting down in a calm setting. I'm sleeping better. My energy has improved. All of these action items are there to help you feel better at the end.
Yeah, wonderful. One last question I have for you. So, I encourage people, hopefully inspire them in this podcast to recognize that it actually is totally possible to live a joyful life when you don't eat sugar or flour. In fact, an even more joyful and healthy life when you don't eat refined carbs, without suffering, without feeling restricted. And I was just wondering whether if people are using this data together with a refined carbohydrate-free diet, whole foods diet, really, it comes down to whether they need to track their data for a long time, or whether just this sort of, let's say, 3-month input is enough to tell them how their body responds, or whether it's a good idea to sort of have this input of data periodically in your life.
Yeah, I think again, it's that N=1, right? If you're someone you're coming to the program and you're already really dialed in and you already are kind of aware of all this stuff, then yeah, 3 months, you've gathered your baseline data, you've done some experimenting, some testing out, right? You're seeing how you feel at the end, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But perhaps if you're someone that's struggling, with some health issues, it could be gut issues, it could be hormone issues, it could be something, having those check-ins maybe a couple times a year could be really helpful. You do a month here, you wait a couple months, you do another month, to kind of give yourself that period. I think sometimes people say, oh, the summers I'm so relaxed, but the winters I'm so stressed out, right? Or I'm sad, or I have, anxiety, all that kind of stuff. Like knowing, being able to use this tool to see what's going on inside your body can be really helpful during those periods of time where you just might be struggling in general, right? So you can really get some more data.
Fantastic, fantastic. And did you tell me that for the moment you don't ship to Canada, just in the States, right?
Correct. As of right now, we're only shipping in the US. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how can people get this little monitor?
So I think my phone is just always listening to me. So I always say, if you say our name 3 times, I'm sure our ads will start to come find you. But we
Yeah.
are on all the social media platforms, at Instagram is @NutrisenseIO, Facebook, I think we're on TikTok. I think, we're all over the place. And then I really would recommend your audience to check out our website, www.nutrisense.io, because we have our blog is called The Journal. And if you're on the fence, if you're not totally sure, kind of, how can this help me? How is this useful to me? The journal has so many well-written, bite-sized, evidence-based articles about how you can use the CGM and how blood glucose and blood sugar data can be helpful to you in your life. So I encourage everyone to check that out.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'll put the links in with the show notes. Thank you so much. This is fascinating. I agree. Knowledge is power. But also knowing what to do with that knowledge is even more powerful. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, so now we know all about CGMs, that's continuous glucose monitors, and whether or not you're diabetic, it can be really fascinating to get an insight into the data of what's happening in your body. And because we're all different, different foods and different situations can affect our blood glucose levels. So whether or not you actually use this gizmo, I think it's really empowering to have that knowledge. And as we were talking about in this episode, knowledge is power. But knowing what to do with that knowledge, in other words, putting it into action, is even more powerful. And how can you get into action? Well, you can start applying that knowledge in your everyday life, starting with cutting sugar and focusing on real whole foods that are delicious, that fill you up, and that give you energy, and that don't make your blood glucose levels spike and crash. And if that sounds easier said than done, then I get it. Actually, it is easier said than done, which is why the After Sugar Club private monthly membership exists, as well as the 90-day program Freedom from Cravings Formula. What's the difference between the two? Well, the After Sugar Club is a lower price monthly subscription, and when you join, you have access to a library of self-study resources that I've created for you with my experience of 8 years of living happily sugar-free and craving-free. You can join the After Sugar Club at any time so that you can reduce or cut sugar with confidence. As an After Sugar Club member, you'll be part of our friendly community of encouraging members who are on the same path to cutting sugar and who lift each other up. We have group check-in calls twice a month so that you can get the support and the accountability you need. The After Sugar Club is open all year round, and the link to join is in the show notes. And my program, the Freedom from Cravings Formula, is a 90-day program and a 90-day commitment for women over 50 who want to get rid of cravings so that they can slim down and finally feel in control around food. The program includes weekly accountability calls with me in a small group so that you can get my step-by-step personal guidance through each part of the 5 steps of the program. And when you join the Freedom from Cravings Formula 90-day program, as a special bonus, you'll have unlimited access to the After Sugar Club, free of charge, for a whole year. The Freedom from Cravings Formula program opens a few times a year, and if you're on my mailing list, you'll be the first to know when registrations open again. To join the program, all you have to do is to book a clarity call with me so that we can talk about your specific needs and whether the program is a good fit for you. Go to aftersugarclub.com to see everything that's included in the program and to schedule a clarity call with me. That's it for this week. Keep in touch and see you soon for another episode.